All right, here's a wild thought for you. What if I told you that the moment you were born, the US government saw you as a business? It sounds pretty out there, right? Well, today we're going to unpack that exact claim, which comes from a really interesting viral video by a group called Tax Lab Inc. So, this is the line that kicks the whole thing off. The source video just comes right out and says, "Did you know that under the US tax code, you are born as a business?" I mean, just think about that for a second. The idea is that the system doesn't just see you as a person, but as a full-on functioning business entity from your very first day. It's a pretty wild thought for sure. And I know what you're probably thinking, because it was my first thought too. How? How is that even possible? A tiny baby? A business? It sounds completely absurd, but let's stick with it. Let's actually follow the logic the source lays out and see how they connect these dots.
Okay, so let's get into the foundation of this whole thing. Where does this pretty shocking tax claim even come from? What's the basis for it?
Well, according to the source, it all comes down to one single thing: your social security number. The whole argument is that the second that number is issued to you, the IRS automatically, by default, assigns you a specific tax status. So what exactly is this default status? Well, this brings us to what the source calls your very first business. And that business is you. And here's the key term: sole proprietorship. The video explains this is basically the IRS's default setting. If you haven't gone out and formed an LLC or a corporation or some other official business entity, then by default, you're taxed as a sole proprietorship. In other words, you're a one-person business in the eyes of the tax code. So the logic here is actually pretty straightforward. It's a simple three-step process. 1, a US citizen is born. 2, they get a social security number. And 3, boom, that's it. You're automatically taxed as a sole proprietorship. You are now officially a business owner, and that business is you. Okay, so if you're a business, by default, how does a baby even get taxed? I mean, what does that actually mean in practice? Let's look at a couple of real-world examples. Yeah, this is where it gets interesting, right? Because theory is one thing, but how does this actually play out? The source video gives us a couple of really simple scenarios to illustrate the point. Okay, so for our first example, let's imagine you buy something and then you sell it for more than you paid. Maybe it's a collectible toy, a comic book, a trading card, whatever. The point is, you made a profit. So what happens to that profit? Well, according to this logic, that's not just extra pocket money. Nope. That profit would be taxed as capital gains, the exact same way a business is taxed when it sells an asset for a profit. All right, let's take a look at another example. Let's say a neighbor pays you to do some work. You mow their lawn, you babysit, you walk their dog, you get the idea. You perform a service and you get paid for it. And the results? Well, in this scenario, you're basically operating as a business. That money you earned, it's taxed just like a sole proprietorship's income. You're not just getting paid, you're generating revenue. And that means you're subject to self-employment tax. But here's the thing, this default business owner status doesn't necessarily last your whole life. The source says there's a huge turning point that changes everything for most people. And that turning point is your first W-2 job. The argument goes that the moment you become a traditional employee, everything changes. Your tax designation fundamentally shifts away from that default sole proprietor status. And this comparison really lays out the key difference. When you're that default sole proprietor, you are responsible for everything, calculating your own taxes, paying self-employment tax, the whole shebang. But when you get a W-2 job, your employer does the heavy lifting. They withhold the taxes for you. It's a totally different ballgame. So what's the big idea behind all this? I mean, why is the source making this point? What's the takeaway? Well, the source really drives the point home with this incredibly provocative quote. They say, when people get mad at business owners, they're just getting mad at babies. Wow. Now that's a statement that's definitely designed to make you stop and rethink the whole idea of what a business owner even is. And that really gets to the core message. The idea is that everyone in the US tax system starts out as a business owner. The line between being an individual and being a business is really just a matter of tax classification. And according to the source, understanding this simple fact is a huge part of becoming financially literate. And that's the final question the source leaves us with. It really makes you think, doesn't it? How might your entire financial perspective change if you started viewing yourself as a business from birth? It's not just about taxes, it's about a fundamental shift in mindset. A pretty powerful idea to chew on.